Good morning, everyone. If you like, you can grab one of the Chumashim. Hopefully there's a couple copies around. I also am distributing some copies with some of the texts that we're going to focus on today, but it's really nice to have the Chumash there because today's Torah portion has so much to do with the litany of laws that are being given and shared with the people. It's called Mishpatim. So before we do that, it's a custom that we begin our Torah study with a blessing. I don't know if we do that here on Shabbat morning, but it's a privilege when we get to learn together to begin our study by elevating the purpose that we're here to accomplish. So the last words of the blessing are la'asok with a kuf, la'asok b'divrei Torah, that we should be engaged in the study and business of Torah together. So let's begin with reciting a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So it's a privilege to sit in the Rabbi's chair today, and thank you, Doug, for passing it out. Rabbi Feinstein's on a scholar in residence weekend, I believe in Boston. He's done this every once in a while, and it's kind of it's a joy, you know, when you think about how spoiled we've been to have him week after week after week here teaching Torah to us, and the rest of the world is just begging for his wisdom, and he acquiesced for a very special community that he has visited over the years, and he went to go be with them. So I'm privileged to sit in his stead and share a little bit of Torah study with us today. So I think also a couple things that we do, a little bit of like housekeeping. It's just wonderful that we're here. In the back we see our artist in residence, and I want to introduce him, and I'd like to invite him up a little bit later. This is Mordechai Rosenstein, and if you haven't met him before personally, take a minute and introduce yourself to him. He hails from the fair city of Philadelphia, which I think he's glowing after a tremendous victory in that city. The Liberty Bell has the verse of Leviticus, but I think that the Super Bowl victory seems to be ringing with divinity more in the hearts and minds of Philadelphians, and I think it's a privilege that he's here. He's kind of touring throughout Los Angeles area, sharing his beautiful art. And he's been here before and has brought his art with us again. I will never forget Diane Sweet has really gifted to our community the extraordinary tapestry, I guess that's what we call it, a tapestry in the Sher Lapati Chapel. It says L'Dor Vador, and that was Mordechai's artistry, and that was Diane's very loving care and contribution to our community. So take a moment and see that on your way out the door if you haven't taken notice of it. And I'm going to invite you up a little bit more because this week's portion, as we begin to study, has an element of it that I would love to I'd love to pick your brain about, because I think as an artist and seeing the world as an artist, there's something to be said about this particular text. We have lots of things going on here in the community. If you are interested today, just like after our Torah study, you can go in the main sanctuary. There's a bat mitzvah there. You can go into the Tat Shabbat where there's cute little kids. You can stay here, and a little bit later there'll be a bunch of elementary school kids, and we're welcoming the kids from the Hebrew school here. There's a library minion which is upstairs and has been meeting twice a month for about 30 years. And there's a lot of stuff going on, including after Shabbat services this morning. We have a special Shabbat shiur. Are you going to have your Parsha study? So we'll have a special Shabbat shiur with Mordechai and Rabbi Farkas, who are going to be discussing your artwork and its influence and its impact on Jewish life. And so we're very much looking forward to learning with you in depth a little bit later on this morning. And then, of course, there's lots of things going on in the life of our community. The College of Jewish Studies, our Wednesday evening lecture series, is actually nearing its conclusion. So you got to figure out what's going to happen after that. Well, believe me, there's a lot happening after that, including Purim, which is following the last College of Jewish Studies, which will be at the end of February. It's coming up really quickly here, and we hope that you'll come and join us on Wednesday evening for, I think it's Broadway Purim. And then we have a great Purim Carnival the following weekend. And then we also have a special lecture the week after that from CSUN. It's Honey Amato, and I can't remember her husband's name, her deceased husband's name, but Maurice, thank you very much. Thanks, David. Maurice and Honey Amato, they've endowed a lecture series sponsored by CSUN that is hosted here at Valley Beth Shalom, and it's on ethics, and we are very pleased to welcome, I think it's Aaron Tapper-Hahn, who is a rabbi. He's an academic. His wife is a rabbi, and perhaps you know the name familiarly because his brother is Jake Tapper, who is frequently on television as a commentator and a political scientist. And so his brother has quite a bit of academic experience in his own right and will be here for that Wednesday evening lecture. That is in the beginning of March, I believe. I believe so we have a few weeks for that. What I'd like to do today is I want to start at the end of the text. And if you've studied the Torah, these sections of the text have a problem. It's a pretty fundamental problem. And it's about the sequence of the texts themselves. So we're reading about it, and we think that it's in a sequential narrative that Moses takes the people out of Israel, brings them to Mount Sinai. God tells the people to prepare for God's presence. Moses goes up to the mountain. God speaks, gives Torah, and then Moses comes back down with the tablets. It says, I have 15 tablets, and drops one tablet and says, I have 10 tablets. That's exactly how it happened. You can look in the Torah. But if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's Mel Brooks and the history of the world. He too was wondering how this came to be, and he said that there was obviously more than 10, but it just, it was too hard for him to manage. So then after that was the rest of the giving of the Torah, because clearly there was insufficient space to contain all 613 mitzvot on 2 tablets. So that seems to be the sequence of events. But when you begin to read, you understand that a couple things are really problematic. One is the text that we're about to read in a second. The other one that I think is more popular is the question about the golden calf. And the question about the golden calf is whether or not the people made this calf in the absence of Moses, who was their leader, was the intermediary between God, if really you wanted to say the manifestation of God for that moment, for these people who needed something tangible to connect to this religious identity that is being formed for them. And in that absence, they build this calf. And then Moses comes down all of a sudden with the tablets and says, what's going on? And he crushes the tablets. And the question is whether or not that took place before God actually spoke the 10 Commandments or after. And the issue is, it actually has a title, Ein Mukdam ve'ein Muchar b'Torah. There is no before and after in the Torah. You've heard this before. Okay, Ein Mukdam ve'ein Muchar b'Torah means there is no chronology in the Torah. And actually, if you want to study it very carefully, the language itself lends us to think that it's possible that the Torah doesn't have temporality like we would assume it to be. Now, the reason why it's important to bring it up here is precisely for what we're going to study today. So you have the sheets in front of you, and turn to chapter 24 if you're following the book. If you want to follow in the book, it's on page 476. On page 476. Now, on page 476, the beginning of the chapter, or you'll see on your study sheet, you see an element of the narrative that is a complete break from the 3 chapters prior. The 3 chapters prior, as we're going to study a little bit more this morning, have to do all with the presentation of laws, primarily civil laws, how people will comport themselves with each other in this new forming society that God has planned for Bnei Yisrael, the Israelite people. And then you have this kind of diversion. So look at what it says. It says, I'll read in English. Then he, that is God, said to Moses, come up to the Lord with Aaron, Nadav, and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel, and bow low from afar. Moses alone shall come near the Lord, but the others shall not come near, nor shall the people come up with him. Moses went and repeated to all the people the commands of the Lord and all the rules, and all the people answered with one voice, saying, all the things that the Lord has commanded we will do. This should be a familiar phrase, na'aseh v'nishma. This is the quintessential acceptance of Torah that the Israelite people not only express here, but in every generation. We are being given a Torah, and it is our gift. It is the beauty of Bnei Yisrael's response to say, we accept the Torah in its entirety, and we will dutifully obey it. We will adhere to its rules. So let's just go. Early in the morning, he set up an altar at the foot of the mountain, 12 pillars. He designated some young men. They offered burnt offerings and sacrificed bulls. Turn to the next page. Moses did this little sacrificial thing. Jump to verse 9. Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 elders ascended, and they saw the God of Israel. Let me repeat that. Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel ascended, and they saw the God of Israel. His feet was there, page 478. His feet there was like the likeness of a pavement of sapphire, like the very sky for purity. Yet he did not raise his hand against the leaders of the Israelites. They beheld God, and they ate and drank. So, first of all, this is not a frequently studied part of the Parsha. And if we understand collectively the story of the Torah, this is not one that we're frequently turning to. If we want to understand what is the story of the Torah, we're not really moving to this moment when we talk about 70 elders going up with Moses on the mountain and seeing God. Now, I imagine that you are beginning to question, what does it mean? What's happening here? What does it mean that they saw God? Did we not just finish hearing that God is not physical, intangible, that God is something that you cannot perceive, but by knowing God, you understand your relationship with that God? Did we not just finish that? Was that not precisely what we were given in the Ten Commandments? The first of the Ten Commandments is, I'm God. I took you out of Egypt. You shouldn't have any other gods. And then don't make a likeness of me. There's no other God like me. So what is it that they saw? Now perhaps we can play the game that I suggested we play before, which is Ein mukdam ve'ein muchar b'Torah. Right? That this is not really a temporal issue. This is just a placement of the narrative. And the reason that it's placed over here is for something that we'll describe perhaps in a second. But regardless of why it is, one of the possibilities is that this is before the Ten Commandments. In other words, we read in the text sequentially, Moses goes up, but he invites the elders up with him. And before the Ten Commandments, 70 elders get to see the Torah. Now, here's an interesting question. Ask yourselves. What do they see? What do you think they saw?
If they see God, they will die.
If they see God, they will die. And yet, the text could not be more explicit. They saw the God of Israel. So what did they see?
You have to define what God really is. And I don't think it defines it there. You may think it's a person or a spirit or whatever, or some people may think the Torah is God.
That's a very helpful frame. That doesn't answer our question. What did the people see? What did they see? I think you're right. It depends on what you think God is. So God is like a mirror. We have a midrash that explains that when God appeared to Israel, God was like a mirror, and each and every person perceived God individually as a reflection of themselves. That's a very reasonable interpretation. It still doesn't describe what we think is going on here.
Maybe we have to define the word see and what see means, because we could say, I see you physically,
Right.
or I see something in my mind's eye where it's so beyond, because there is a midrash that says that after the second commandment, it was so powerful that they said, Moses, you listen to God and then you give us the rest, so that they couldn't bear that seeing and that the power of it. So defining see from a different perspective.
Right. So I think the point is, let's figure out what see means, and by extension, let's understand that we have to come up with a definition of it, because the people themselves, and it's actually not a midrash, it's literally in the text itself, it says the people said, we can't handle hearing God, you go up, Moses, and you intercede on our behalf. And yet, go back to this point, and it says the 70 elders were up there, and they saw God. What did they see? In fact, it gives us a little bit of line. If you want to go back to the text, it says, right? It says that there was this pavement of sapphire, like the very sky for purity. Well, that's really tough, and Rabbi can tell me, like, we're pretty capable of interpreting text. That makes no sense at all. That makes no sense at all. And I can give you some sort of thoughts of what that looks like. Parenthetically, there is in the rabbinic tradition a very similar episode of 4 people that enter into the garden. There's a story of Rabbi Akiva and Shimon ben Zoma and Shimon ben Azai and one that they call Acher, Elisha ben Avuya. And they go in to see God. They go on a mystical journey to see God. And one of them perceives this. In fact, Rabbi Akiva is the one that says, when you see these things that look like stones, do not perceive them as stones at all. They're an illusion. So this is sort of one of Judy's dilemmas, is what did they see? Because even the thing that they perceived may not have been it. The only thing that we're left with, and why I'm still challenging this, is it says they saw the God of Israel. It doesn't say they saw something and they weren't sure about it. It doesn't say they saw something but it was an illusion. No. This is for sure. It says they saw the God of Israel. And the question that you should also be holding on to, which Ron brought up, is who gets to see God and lives? We've already learned that. So how do they get to see God?
Yeah, well, so the actual words are V'yahu et Elohai Yisrael. So this is the God, it's not Adonai, the God of Israel. So as far as I know, there's a difference between the name of God and actually seeing that, whatever that entity is, and these words, which I'm not sure what they represent.
That's an interesting distinction. That's kind of like what Mel is saying, is that perhaps the God that they are perceiving isn't this sort of totality of being in existence that we identify with God, but really it's a manifestation of God, this Elohai Yisrael, right? Which is the Elohim, the lawgiver of Israel. It is the physical manifestation of God in our interpersonal experiences, if we wanted to give it a very tight definition for this time being. Possibly. Of course, that leaves us with a dilemma. How many gods are there? How many? There's a God for law giving. There's a God for everything. There's a God for the sun. There's a God for moon. We could follow a slippery slope of that if we're not careful. Jack, are you okay? You had a hand? Or no, you're good. Okay. Yeah.
Could it be they saw the knowledge that there is God?
Right. It could be that they saw the knowledge of God. The only thing that the text says is that they saw the God of Israel. And the way that they describe it is with this kind of physicality. It's got this pavement of sapphire and a sky for, like, what they saw was something beyond our human perception. I've never seen, the likeness of pavement of sapphire or sky for purity. I've never seen that before. But I imagine if I got to go up on a mountain and see it, that would be great if I saw even that. So clearly we're left with a dilemma, right? We're left with a dilemma. It's a remarkable challenge because we're just talking about a Torah that has a very simple message. This is a God that you can't see. This is a God that you can't touch. This is a God that doesn't have any likeness or manifestation in reality. And yet, in the very narrative that is telling you that all those things are true, we have this line that says, and they saw it, the God of Israel. So here's what I want to do for a few minutes. I want to present, I think there are two elements of this, and then we're going to shift back into the beginning of the Torah reading, because I think that this actually does lend us some understanding of what it is that this episode represents and how it does fundamentally play a part in the narrative. By the way, I think this is a great book. Somebody needs to write this book. What the people saw. What the people saw. When the people see God, what did they see? Right? And you have everything that you've all shared so far. Look at all the variety of interpretations that we've begun to play with. Imagine somebody having a very good handle on this little episode, which is not well written, and being able to capture that for us. Yes?
I'm just kind of curious, when they're moving about and God moves with them, it describes it that it's a cloud with a fire in it.
Absolutely, and if you read the text deeply in the portion this week, it says, God says, I'm going to send an angel before you. So if you want to just see what I'm talking about, you have to turn back to page 475 and 474. Right? So it's not that there aren't manifestations of God at all. And throughout the entire book, throughout Genesis, we have these angels that appear to Abraham. We have God speaking to Abraham. There's plenty of anthropomorphic or body-like manifestations of God that are throughout the book. So there's nothing surprising that they are able to see something physical here, potentially. Look at verse 20. I'm sending an angel before you to guard you on the way and bring you to a place that I have made ready. Pay heed to him and obey him. Do not defy him, for he will not pardon your offenses, since my name is in him. But if you obey him and do all that I say, I will be an enemy to your enemies and a foe to your foes. And it'll continue on for a little bit about that. So the people have an angel. People have some manifestation of God. So maybe what the people are seeing is this angel of God that's hanging out with them. And all the more so, when the people are up on the mountain, they get to eat and drink with God. If you get to see God, what are you going to do? Right? What would you do? Would you crack open a beer and be like, hey God, this is a nice handcrafted IPA. It's delicious. How about this? Or this is locally sourced foie gras. Here you go. I mean, I don't know what you eat when you eat with God. I don't know what they were eating, but that's another really great interpretation. What did they drink and what did they eat? Where did they get the food?
It's a salmon mousse.
Yeah, it was a salmon. Exactly. Well, we could say that, but that's not what's being written.
Just to interpret it that way.
Yeah, look, if we read in a few more chapters, again with this playing of when this happens in time, Moses wants to see God face to face. And God says, you can't see my face, but I will show you my presence.
Exactly.
There it's explicit. Here, this is as explicit. It's almost the exact opposite. It's almost a contradiction in terms. The people see God face to face, potentially, right? Seems that's the way it's written. And over there, Moshe, the prophet, the leader, the teacher of people Israel, doesn't get to see it. So let's take a journey together, okay? Just for a couple minutes. So what I did is I prepared a few interesting texts that are connected to this. What I'd like to begin with is a couple of interpretations about the Torah itself and what the people are going up to receive. And then we'll move not only to what Moses is perceiving, but then we'll also talk about what the people are accepting when they say Na'aseh v'nishma. And I think that these are dimensions and features that are going to help us understand this text a little bit better. So if you look at the bottom of the page, the first bullet point, I've just collected for us midrashim. This is rabbinic stuff, not modern, there's one Hasidic text. Mostly these are ancient texts. You know, Leviticus Rabbah is one of the oldest midrashic works in the entire Tanakh or in the entire rabbinic tradition, and it's, codified around the 5th century of the Common Era. Okay? So, Rabbi Levi told a parable of an isolated settlement thrown into confusion by ravaging troops. What did the king do? He set a guard within it to protect it. The Holy One acted a similar manner by saying the Torah is called a stone, as in the verse, the tablets of stone, and the law and the commandment, which is coming out of our text. Moses is told by God, parenthetically here, to write the words of the Torah on the tablets of the stone and to bring them to the people. The impulse to evil is likewise called the stone. As in the verse, I will take the heart of stone out of your flesh. Thus, since the Torah is a stone and the impulse to evil is a stone, let one stone guard against the other stone. All right, what are we looking at? This is kind of confusing and perplexing. Why am I bringing this, and how did this get to be here? So we're pivoting from the conversation about seeing God. Unfortunately, there's very little midrashic work about what the people saw. That's something that I think is an important point to bring to our study today. There isn't a lot of interpretation about that, but there's tremendous amount of interpretation on what the people are receiving and how the elders bring the Torah to the people. And look at this. It says, the Torah written on the tablets, Shnei Luchot Habrit, the two tablets of covenant, are to be a protection against what they call the Yetzer Hara. Now, we've studied the Yetzer Hara in many different things, but here, what is it that we're trying to understand here? Law, the law which is being given, is the correction. It is the guide to help us overcome our impulse to evil. Bringing law into the world. It's okay. Got it? Okay. Bringing law into the world is a correction against the worst parts of human nature. Human nature left alone will tend, in sort of an arc of justice, will attend towards an arc of evil. Right? Human beings, without guidance, without instruction, will resort ultimately to some kind of diminishment of their humanity or the humanity of another, based on selfish interest, based on motivations of a group, a crowd, or some might argue by even natural forces. Okay? Yes?
Yeah, I'm reading it in Hebrew, and what I see is, like, if you go back to those days, those 70 people, plus Moses, plus Aaron, all they knew until that point is paganism. So maybe when they were brought, and if you think about what the Rambam said, if you see Lirot et Darkei Elohim, to see what God's means, is like it's their revelation of, they saw Darkei Elohim, they see what actually God means versus paganism.
Right.
So spiritually,
right.
What they saw, they didn't actually see God, they saw Darkei Elohim.
Right, so thank you. And just to translate, Darkei Elohim is the way of God, which I think we were trying to like touch around. The presence of God, the perception of God, some kind of like mental, intellectual journey that we take in order to understand what God is, as opposed to a physical, tangible reality. The Rambam's going to be taking care of that much further, 1,000 years after this conversation. But he really helps us to understand that when we're talking about God and what the people are seeing themselves, it's not a physical thing. It's not a physical thing, right? They saw the God of Israel, and what they didn't see was a physical being, right? The only challenge that we still have is that it gives us a definition of what they saw. Like they saw this pavement of sapphire and the sky with the very likeness of purity, which is an incredibly abstract idea, and perhaps they were trying to say that this is something physical that's so abstract that we can't mentally perceive it. Maybe they were trying to, go to the fantastic, which the Rambam talks about as well. That's a possibility. But our interpretation leading forward, and this text that I introduced, is if it's the way of God, look at the story. Look at this little midrash. Basically, God gives the law to help us buttress against our natural capacity to do evil. Why are we having this conversation? Why do the people go up to the top of the mountain? So that they can receive instruction on how to better themselves, how to elevate themselves from the base human experience, which is exactly what they've come from. You want to call it paganism, you want to call it idolatry, whatever you want to call it, from the other nations of the world. This is a new religious doctrine in which the concept of being in a relationship with God, having a covenant with God, is something that elevates us from beyond our natural human abilities. That's what's being played out here on the page. Yes?
Question. I was able to follow this midrash until the last couple of words of it, and then I got lost.
Okay.
And here's the story. I mean, if I can understand that the Torah would be guarding against the evil inclinations and our impulses, and that's fine. So that'd be one stone against evil. But the end of it says, let one stone guard against the other stone. It suggests a duality. And so I don't understand how that could be given the rest of the text. Sorry.
No. I think we have that's a great question, right? So I think we have a desire to, once we have a taste of eradicating evil in our lives, we have a desire to completely obliterate it. That challenge is something that shows up again and again and again in rabbinic literature. It's something that shows in medieval literature and even in modernity, and it's a very present day concern. The head of the front page of the Jewish Journal says, is truth, what is truth? I can't remember the headline, but it's all about this concept that we're grappling with today called truth decay. Truth decay, right? The concept that we're living in a world in which we can't trust the facts that are being given to us. We don't rely upon them because there's a belief that somehow the facts that are given to us are tainted in some way. They're opinionated.
Is that really new though? Isn't that?
No, not at all. But here's the point. The point is that even today there is constantly a challenge against what is and what ought to be. That's what we talk about here. So this midrash says what ought to be is not an obliteration of the evil or the falsity or the mendacity of human behavior in the world, but it's how to put a guard one against the other. And Torah represents the strongest, like a stone, the Torah represents the strongest guard against the ravaging forces. That's what the midrash is trying to teach. So when the people go up to see what they see, I'd like to suggest this is what they're beginning to see. What they're beginning to see is, what is it that what is the law that's being given? It's not just a different law. They're not just replacing one law with a new set of laws, which is going to create the same dilemmas that the society around them is already grappling with. There's an entirely new set of laws, which we're going to get to before the end of our morning, and that you read in this week's Torah portion, that move beyond the simple responsibilities of human behavior to what we call the ethical or the moral. That's what Judaism brings. That's what this text introduces for us. Yeah.
You have to have a duality, I think. If you don't have a duality, you have a singularity, which implies an absolutism. You have an absolutism, you have no freedom of choice, you're a little more than robots. So if everything is evil or if everything is good, there's no way that we can get in there and function as free individuals.
Okay.
Maybe we are robots, I don't know, but that happens if you don't have a duality. And all through the Bible, in fact, all through science, all through the world, everything is basically a duality.
Right. I think.
The Western construct, that
Yeah.
duality does exist in the East, and there are lots of people on this earth who believe in oneness, not duality. Not to be contentious, but in a lot of philosophical writings about Judaism talk about the oneness, an aspiration toward oneness.
Nice, but I would think what's trying to be brought up is that out of duality can emerge oneness. I think that's what with the tension, right? In sort of a philosophical Hegelian dialectic, right? There's the thesis and the antithesis, and then they smoosh together with a synthesis, right? And then that from there creates a new thesis and antithesis. That's potentially one construct that we're talking about. But you're absolutely correct in saying this is a Western understanding of things, and it goes back to what Elon said earlier about the fact that this might just be one manifestation of God that the people saw. And what we're dealing with here is one manifestation and trying to understand our relationship to it. And there's certainly other examples where we're going to come into relationship and encounter Adonai. So that's an interesting side point, but I want to make sure we don't get too far afield. Okay.
It's not just Western philosophy, it's science, which transcends all Western and Eastern whatever. And a lot of it lies just in what Heisenberg showed back in the 20s, that you can't really know exactly. You always have this duality.
Mm-hmm.
You have a principle, you have an uncertainty.
Yeah.
There's always uncertainty.
Yeah, that's right. So if you were to say that the duality is certainty and uncertainty, and you want to call that scientific, I mean, I think what we're saying is that, and even what Jeff is saying is that it's not that that's the only way to perceive the world. People focus on a concept of oneness. What's remarkable here is that this is a text which is trying to teach us about oneness, and it is riddled with all kinds of uncertainties and inconsistencies. What is the message that that's teaching us? That's, and the people see that. Yeah.
You said one short little throwaway line that I want to pull out, seemingly throwaway. You said, once we get the taste of being successful against the Yetzer Hara, we want to do it again. I'm, paraphrasing you. Which I thought that was interesting. Really, I mean, can you expand on that? The idea that we'd be interested in what do we feel when we succeed against a particular evil?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, wow.
That's a great question. Flip the page. Let's flip the page. Flip the page, and on the back side. So this comes from a little bit later. This comes from Menachem Mendel of Kotz, the Kotzker Rebbe. We know about his text, right? His famous teaching is the students come to him, their teacher, and they say, "Where's God?" And he says, "Wherever you let God in," which is a tremendous statement about the presence of God, the immanence of God in the world. It's something that is active and participatory. So let's read what he has to say here, because he has to say something very specific about Moshe and Moshe's purpose here. So God said to Moses, "Come up to the mount and be there, and I will give you the tablets of stone and the commandments which I have, that you may teach them." This seems redundant. If Moshe went up to the mountain, of course he would be there. However, this is a proof that a person can exert tremendous effort to reach the top of the mountain, yet without being there. He may be standing on the mountain, but his head may be elsewhere. The main thing is not the ascent, but being there, and only there, and not to be below at the same time. So maybe, as this text suggests, that in order for Moshe to receive the Torah, he had to be in the cloud with God and separated from his purpose with the people. Maybe the people, the 70 elders, and Moshe and Aharon and Nadav and Avihu, all who went up with them to the top of the mountain to see God, maybe they too also had to elevate themselves to this status of not being concerned about what was going to happen below. What were they taking back to the people, but what did it mean to actually be in presence? So my question of what they saw is almost irrelevant, because what they saw is not something that we're ever going to be privileged to, because it's something that we have down here. And the idea that there are some people let alone one that can emerge all the way to the top of the mountain and can perceive God, that's something that we retain in our tradition as perhaps a lofty goal to aspire to. That the purpose of our own Torah study, the purpose of our own living as responsible human beings, is so that we too may be privileged to ascend the mountain and perceive God without being concerned with the needs below. That's what I think is a response to your question. It's that this idea that we have the potential to transcend our human selves and to become something closer to divinity, that feeling and experience that we have as human beings is something that inspires us. It compels us.
Yeah, but once it's like, I like it, I'll do it again.
The point of the Torah seems to be at this point, when you follow the law, you have that capacity. That seems to be the Torah that we're moving towards. Doug, you look very perplexed.
So, I think it was the last sentence stated, when you follow the law, you said you have that capacity. So, eating a piece of kosher meat does that for you? I mean, I'm losing that.
Okay, that was great. No, it's a fantastic thing, right? So, yes, right? I would say yes. And the dilemma is, it's not about eating the kosher meat, but what the Kotzker Rebbe is suggesting here, what I think is happening up on the top of that mountain is, they ate and drank too, presumably kosher food, right? Or salmon mousse, or whatever you want, right? I mean, just keep your imagination going. What did they have? A very fine 100 proof bourbon, right? They were really enjoying themselves.
Like choosing the kosher meat over the crawfish, I'm from Louisiana.
Right.
Making the right choice in a sense, like moving toward godliness, right? Or engaging in tzedakah, that feeling that you try to teach your children, like, giving is the most phenomenal feeling. Like, is it all wrapped up in that same?
Well, just go back. Let's go back. We're playing back with the food.
When he says giving is a phenomenal feeling, you're supposed to give whether you feel good or not about it. Ideally, you want to do it for the right reasons, but, tell me, will the shul turn down somebody's money because they want to name a building after them? Hell no. I mean, you start by the act of giving, and maybe somewhere along the line, you do it out of noble feelings, but they still want you to give.
Yeah, no, I think, right, I think that the question is, if you have a kosher burger, does that elevate you to the status of being up on the top of the mountain and seeing God? Right? You could say, is that really possible? And you'd say, no, of course not, right? Because what's the difference between a kosher burger and some crawfish? I mean, crawfish is actually quite good, right? So right? We could have that conversation all day long about which one's more divine, right? But we're not going to have that. What the point I think is being introduced here, and I think what law serves to accomplish, is that by adhering to it, it creates a potential of that elevation and that connection. And I think why this text is showing up in this particular moment, and it's not earlier, and it's not later, and it's a part of the book altogether, is precisely because it is this recognition, it's this acknowledgement that seeing the God of Israel is possible through divine behavior. Through divine behavior. I believe that. And I think that it's not about eating a kosher burger, but it's about what it does to you. How does it affect you? So this whole teaching about it being, you have to be there. So if you're just eating your burger, I want to give you a great example. I mean, like, this is the opposite. Last week at the Peterson Automotive Museum was the Kosher Food and Wine Expo, right? So this is an extraordinary experience, and I highly recommend that you come and be a part of it. It's fantastic. They bring wines from all around the world. They bring the best kosher food from all around the city, and you get to walk around, and you get to try the wine, and you get to try the food, and you get to see these cars. It's an amazing thing. Now, it happens to be appealing to a more observant community. You would assume, for a more observant community, that the consumption of really good wine and really good food would be divine. I heard from the security, this is a concern for me. I heard from the security the next day, because I was there and our Valley Beth Shalom security was there. And they said, "Oh, Rabbi, you really hang around with a tough crowd." And I said, "What happened? I left and it was nice and everybody was a good time." You know, when I left, it got rowdy. And what happened, so, you know, just imagine, like we're imagining what the people saw. Just imagine what a rowdy Orthodox party on the top of the Peterson Automotive Museum with Israeli wine and kosher food looks like. So it was the opposite of divine, right? It was the opposite of divine. Now, maybe alcohol does that, and food, but here's the thing, like they're eating this. Maybe sort of conspicuous and limitless consumption produces that kind of behavior, which is, always a bad, yes. But I think the challenge that we have here is that this is not something that is reserved for only the special elect. This is something that we all have the capability and the capacity to achieve. But it's not like we can all climb the top of the mountain and see God without being there. We have to be there. Okay?
Something about mindfulness, and so if you eat the kosher burger and you're doing it as a matter of, that's what I do, or if you do it with the intent of, I'm doing this because this is my path to feeling towards the laws that are written that make me feel more involved with God's ruling and God's laws. And so it's like praying, like the person who prays and goes blah, 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 and what are they doing? Or the person who takes it in and is praying and seeing something that has meaning.
Yeah.
So it's the mindfulness. It's not the eating the kosher burger, but what does that say to me?
That's precisely
And what connection does it show? And all of the fences that Judaism puts around Judaism is to provide that for us.
We're definitely moving in that direction. That's something that seems a lot more reasonable in our time, as opposed to just being law adherent people. So there is a perception that we're growing from in our modern age, which says that it's not about having a body of laws, it's about the intent behind the laws. That's exactly a part of it. Just a couple quick comments, and then I want us to move to a couple more things before the end of the day. Ron, are you okay?
Yeah, I wanted to say that God didn't write on the tablets the way it showed in the picture of the Ten Commandments.
Like that? Yeah.
Man wrote it down, so there's a source of error there in dictating and writing down.
Uh-huh.
And not only that, what voice did God use in talking about?
Yeah, those are really great questions, which are going to take us a little far afield. So with respect, I'm going to acknowledge that there are questions that are lingering, and we're going to move on.
One last one. Eating a kosher burger doesn't necessarily make you closer to God. It makes you closer to the Jewish people. Anybody can eat a kosher burger. But if some guy who's not Jewish and doesn't know anything about it happens to eat a kosher burger, it doesn't make him closer to God. It doesn't make him closer to Jewish people. But when a Jew eats a kosher burger, it's getting closer to the Jewish people.
Again, that there's an intent issue there, which I think we're kind of like swirling around, and how important it is to be intentional with what laws are being given. It's almost irrelevant what laws are being given in that way, but as long as whatever laws are being given are ones in which your intent can bring you to that place of conscientiousness, of mindfulness, of higher purpose, that's okay. Now, obviously, there are laws that are more conducive to that than others, which is what we should be discussing in just a minute. I want you to just take a quick look with me, one of the beautiful midrashim about that wonderful moment when the people say, Na'aseh v'nishma. So we've been talking about Moses. We've been talking about the exclusive group of people that went up to the mountain to see God or whatever they saw, but it's all about the people. So on the one hand, it could be the elders coming down and bringing the Torah. We saw God and it was great. Or it could be the voice of Moshe and saying, the Torah is coming, and the people respond. And that's exactly what we're confronting here. The people say, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do what is being commanded of us. We will dutifully obey. We will be faithful to what is being given to us, And that serves as one of the most beautiful symbols of covenantal relationship between God and the people of Israel. Now, one of the famous midrashim that's not on the page that you've heard before is that God goes to all the other nations in the world and says, right, have you heard this, right? And says, all right, go to the Edomites. I have this Torah. And they say, what's in it? And they say, thou shalt not murder. And they say, well, we can't follow that because we're too busy, murdering. So God goes to all the nations of the world, and they all have something, the picayune, about their disagreements with the function of the law. They say, it's fine except for this part. Until they get to Bnei Yisrael, and what does Bnei Yisrael do? Na'aseh v'nishma. Na'aseh v'nishma, right? The joke of that is, the Jew says, how much does that cost? Which, it's terrible. Yes. All right, so look at this last one. On the contrary, this is the beautiful midrashim that are contained by our people. So this is coming from the Song of Songs, which we know as we gather close to Passover, to Pesach, we're going to liken the book, Shir HaShirim, as a love story between God and the Jewish people. These are the texts that give us some of that insight. They help shape and form that insight. So as a lily among thorns, okay, this is in the book Song of Songs, this is the lover describing his lover, his bride, intended to be. Rabbi Azariah, in the name of Rabbi Judah, son of Rabbi Shimon, illustrated a verse by a parable of a king who had an orchard planted with a row of fig trees, a row of grapevines, a row of pomegranate trees, and a row of apple trees. Yum. The king turned this orchard over to a caretaker and went away. After a while, the king came back, looked into the orchard to see how it fared, but found it overgrown with thorns and thistles. He summoned woodcutters to raise it, but as he looked again at the thorns, he noticed among them a rose-colored lily. He took hold of it, breathed in its fragrance, and his spirit was calm. Then the king said, because of this lily, let the entire orchard be spared. And that is the parable. Likewise, says the rabbi, the whole world, all of it was created for the sake of Torah. The whole world is an orchard of apple trees and pomegranate trees and grapevines and fig trees. But after 26 generations, which is a wonderful numerical connection. 26 generations is the generation that receives the Torah from the origin of the world. What else is numerically valuable about 26? What's numerical about 26? What? The name of God. The name of God. What a beautiful connection. I don't know if it was intentional. Probably. What a beautiful intent. After 26 generations, the people are going to come to, what do they see? They see what the name of God means. That could be it. After 26 generations, when the Holy One looked closely at his world to ascertain what it had done, God found it muddy water within muddy water. So after the generations, he sees the generation of Enosh, right, which is where human and divine beings are cavorting. Water within water. The generation of the flood, that's Noah, water within water. The generation of the dispersion, the Tower of Babel, water within water. God summoned destroyers to raise the world, but then noticed a rose-colored lily, Bnei Yisrael. God took hold of it and breathed their fragrance. And so God gave Yisrael the 10 Commandments. When God heard their response, Na'aseh v'nishma, in giving the 10 Commandments, God's spirit was calmed. The Holy One then said, because of a lily, an orchard was spared. Because of Torah and Yisrael, let the world be spared. So what's happening here is not only about the people being able to raise themselves up and elevate themselves to a place to meet God, but there's also an element about God's mind changing. Now, God perceives Bnei Yisrael as that rose-colored lily, and by breathing in their fragrance, the Na'aseh v'nishma. When God hears Na'aseh v'nishma from us, God spares the world. When we say again and again, we will adhere to this tradition, we will hold truth, this Torah, and we will obey it. Every generation, God spares the world, so says the teaching. God is calmed by that, because otherwise the world is overgrown with thorns and thistles. How easy it is to see that. How easy it is to see the thorns and thistles. How sobering and powerful the reminder it is that by adhering to the words of the Torah, we are able to be that rose-colored lily that somehow emerges through the thorns and thistles. Let's just do one more, okay? Another Shira Shirim. Your eyes are doves. As a dove is unpretentious, so was Israel unpretentious with the Holy One at Sinai. For they did not say 10 commandments are enough, or 20 or 30. Love that, right? Again, that's sort of one of those bad jokes. How much is in it, right? That's what everybody else is saying. 10 or 20 or 30. They didn't say like, we only want 30 mitzvot, and we'll be fine. They say, whatever it is that you give us, we will adhere to. But all that the Lord has spoken, we will do and obey. As a dove is distinguished by its cooing, so is Yisrael distinguished by their deeds. So we are like the doves. You ever wonder why there's doves and all through Jewish art? Part of it is because of literature like this. Yes, it's the dove of the flood, and then there's also this dove in the Midrash. This dove that we are likened to, which makes us, as we coo, what is the cooing of the dove for Bnei Yisrael? It's mitzvot. It's the practice, it's the action of what Jews do. Just like a dove can't do anything but coo, a Jew can't do anything but observe mitzvot. Forget the sociological challenges to that. A Jew coos like a dove with mitzvot. What a beautiful potential teaching here. Perceiving God on the mountain is built on these ideas. It's structured on this. It's not something that you wait for somebody to give to you. It's not something that you get with a half-hearted commitment. With total commitment, it is possible. Why this text shows up in the Torah is because there's a possibility and a potential to perceive God, however we want to say we saw it. Now we have just a few minutes. I would like to invite our artist in residence forward. Would you like to come forward for a minute? I have a question for you. Once again, this is Mordechai Rosenstein. He's our artist in residence this weekend. He is a renowned author. I'm going to just take this for a second, thanks. Okay, come, take a seat. And just for a few minutes, if you allow me to ask a question of you. Sure. Come take a seat. I already told him a little bit. You're from Philadelphia, so that's good, right? Okay, good. It's hard to keep kosher in Philadelphia, isn't it?
Not at all.
No, okay, good. So, this part of the Torah is not really explored often. And you're an artist. And we're left with this kind of creativity about what it is that was seen and what it is that we're meant to see. How would you as an artist, and also as a student of Torah, how would you perhaps depict this moment? What would you draw?
Quite frankly, I wouldn't attempt it. I really mean it, Rabbi, yeah. But other things you touched on, like, well, you know, somewhere in the, I don't know if it's in the Torah, it mentions again that the temple was the footstool of the Creator. I don't know where that, are you familiar with it?
Absolutely.
Again, it's a reference to feet, to foots, you know? So I don't know what the connection might be, that the temple was called the footstool of the Creator. And then when you mentioned the doves, that was a beautiful thing because, you know, Noah sent out a raven first. She came back, wasn't satisfied, doesn't say why, but he puts her back in the cage. Then he takes a dove and sends her out, you know, to determine if the waters had receded. So there's something special about the dove that the raven didn't have, which you mentioned. But I don't even write the four-letter name of the Creator, you know, Yud K Vav K to 26. Although I give contributions of 26. I'm holy. Yeah. But I don't think I would ever attempt to, you know, I've never done a Holocaust piece. But that tragedy is beyond me. I don't think there's any way to depict it. And you see photographs of kids in the Warsaw Ghetto, terrible. So I've never done a Holocaust piece, and this again, I wouldn't attempt. I just don't have enough knowledge. Yeah, so that's where that's at.
Have you ever taken any aspect of this week's Torah portion with all of the laws? You know, the very famous and important parts of the Torah. You shall not oppress a stranger, for you were strangers in Egypt. It not only establishes civil code in this week's Parsha, but there's also a moral code that's being given as well. So the question is, have you ever done that in any of your art, and what's been your motivation behind that, if so?
I have done it. And actually the request was by a lawyer whose daughter is an immigration attorney, and he asked that pasuk. So I go to an Orthodox shul in Philadelphia, but there's a woman educator. She's my rabbi, and I called her, I said, Sonny, where do I find the source? Because I was only given the pasuk. And before she could, right out of her lips, before she could tell me the source, she said, that pasuk appears in the Torah 36 times, more than any other pasuk in the Torah. You shall, not mistreat the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. So.
How did you depict it? So what did you do?
I did like the Ten Commandments. One side is Hebrew, one side is English. And if you look on the Hebrew side, I snuck in a pyramid and some bulrushes, because Moshe was found among the bulrushes, and we were in Egypt, so there's a pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a very obvious,
Mm-hmm.
and the Hebrew itself, how the letters, it's interesting. You may have heard it last night, that in Kabbalah, they say that the spaces between the letters are also letters. And if you think about it, so there's no negative space. If you change that area, you affect the letters. Now, about 1952, I studied with one of the great abstract expressionist artists. His name was Franz Klein, who worked in black and white. And he told me, I don't paint black on white, I paint black and white. He was saying the same thing, that one shape of what is as important as the other. One defines and explains the other shape. So whenever you go to Pinot and paint, consider every area on the canvas as important. No negative areas.
Mm. One more question, and thank you for being with us today. So you are, you're still kind of looking in the world and perceiving the world and trying to use your craft and your gift to depict the world as you see it. You use the medium, the modality of the Hebrew language and Jewish concepts and wisdom to portray that. What is it in the world that you see today that you think needs to be artistically represented? And how do you use Jewish concepts in order to convey that message? Do you understand the question?
Not quite.
Yeah?
Yeah, I don't watch movies anymore. They're so violent. I'm a peaceable man. I mean, more and more violent. It's just, we can't find the movie we enjoy, me and my wife. Just very few movies, like Churchill, that was a good one.
Uh-huh.
Well, I was there at that time. I remember the Second World War. I had a map in my bedroom, so my children are amazed when I say, I know where Kwajalein is. It's an island in the South Pacific. They didn't learn that in geography, so I really learned geography in the Second World War, and Churchill was a hero, and Stalin, and Roosevelt.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but wait, go back to the question.
The question is, what do you see in the world today that needs to be drawn? What do we need to draw in the world today?
It's almost selfish. I get into my studio, and it's very peaceful. There's no walls. I could work in a closet when you start to work, and there's no walls, and it's just, again, the Hebrew alphabet. And these pasukim, what you see the work out there is always suggested. We found a great source, like you gave us a pasuk here, that I will dwell among them. So we added it to our inventory. So it's not really my scholarship when you see all this work. For years, we've been on the road, and we come to a synagogue and say, give us a pasuk, and I usually paint it there.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
But I'm getting old, and not withdrawing, but I kind of turn away. It's a miserable place out there. I hate to say that, with more wars and just going on, everything. So I really do retreat into my studio.
Nice. Well, I hope you find inspiration amongst us. Look at this very beautiful crowd that has come to learn Torah on the Shabbat morning. Thank you all for being here this morning. It's great. Have a great week. Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Oh, sorry, I finished on a sad note.
No, perfect.
A downer.
Yeah, it's okay. So.
You know, I'll tell you something. You know, if